Then when the people from the Top Gap moved out of those tin huts and got a house down at the mission, they would move into their tin hut, okay? And they moved into Moree because they had houses, the government was building houses. What else did they have? I just told you it was first built in 1933 at the reserve.
Yeah, school.
A school. They wanted a house and they wanted to educate their kids. That's why they moved to Moree. So what happened then? After a few years, they started to look at the living conditions of the people out of Bogabilla and Termala, and then they started to get things out there for them. So then they became isolated from Moree, okay? That's why now, if you've got a service that you want to give to Termala and Bogabilla, you've got to go out there. Okay? All right. So I was born in a tin hut at Top Camp. When I was 7 years old, my nanny Duncan, Roseanne Duncan, she lived at the Top Camp too. She reared my mother. Okay? She was working for a man called Ernie Thompson. Mr. Thompson is a plumber. He was a plumber. He was also a councilman. He had a son called Ernie. She used to go and clean his house up. When the wool scour and the soap factory burnt down here in Adelaide Street, there were 7 houses called Soapy Row. They called it Soapy Row because Mr. Thompson owned the soap factory and the wool scour. What is a wool scour? Anybody know what a wool scour is?
It's the oil out of the wool.
Okay, so you're going, yeah. So when they shore the sheep, okay, the wool was filthy dirty. So they used to wash it, and they called it drying it on the green. So they would dry it out on the grass, or they would dry it out over a fence before they bagged it up, all right, a lot of the wool. So the lanolin that came out of the wool, right, was saved to make soap. It became an excellent soap. They used it at the baths because back then they had a men's pool and a women's pool. They didn't have mixed, okay? When you went to the baths back then, not that I used to go there because Aboriginal people were banned, but I knew that they had handmaidens who bought the towel and the soap was made at this factory, okay? When the factory, the soap factory and the wool scour burnt down in the early 40s, all those white people who lived in those 7 houses who were the workers from the soap factory and the wool scour, they had to get other jobs because Mr. Thompson decided not to rebuild. So all those white people in those houses started to move away. You know Molly Heffron, there's a shop there next to the Victoria Hotel. Old Molly Heffron, her family lived up there. She used to live in one of those houses. Okay, so Nanny Duncan, because she was working for old Ernie Thompson, she said, Ernie, can I have one of those houses? And he said, of course you can, Roseanne. So Roseanne moved into the house that I have today. I have bought my great-grandmother's house. I have renovated it. She moved into it because it was a house with the windmill and the water. And the overflow from the tank, there was a great big iron bowl. It was like half a bowl. It was half a ship's boiler. Don't ask me how they ever got it up here. It was pure iron. They would have had to have pulled it up here by oxen. It was pure iron, and that was the cauldron that they used to melt the soap, to make the soap, okay? When the factory burnt down, it ended up at Nanny Duncan's house as an overflow to catch the water from the windmill. Okay, so, okay, we're up to the cauldron and Nanny Duncan. So she got the second house. Then she got my mother and father a house next door to her. Then on the other side she got her daughter, Alf, Laurie and Jim. And then further down she got Percy and Liz. Liz died of a burst of appendicitis and he lost his wife. So then Percy moved up in with Nanny Duncan, and Nanny Duncan reared Barry and Eileen and Whippo. She reared them next door to me. Okay, and then Les and Connie, her other son, moved up and took that house, and then Alma, her other daughter, got the other house, and then Lily, her other daughter, got that house. There was only one house where the Craigies live up there today, that did not belong to the Duncan, and it's still referred to today as Soapy Road. Okay, I went to school at the mission. The old rotten old bus called the butter box, they called it the butter box because in those days the butter used to come in square boxes, okay? And they called it the butter box because it looked like a square box. And they had a part built on the back where you just threw we had school bags in those days. You didn't have paws. You had school bags that you wore on your back, and they were leather, okay? So all those bags with your lunch and your books and stuff in went into this part that was off the old butter box. Every day we had to push that rotten old bus because it broke down. And when it was rain, we'd have to take our shoes and socks off, if we had shoes and socks, and we'd have to get out barefoot and push that old thing in the mud. Because back in those days, they had no gravel, they had no tar road. It was dirt. And when it rained, the dunny cart couldn't go down there to empty the dunny cart, so they have to bury it themselves. And you couldn't get an ambulance down there, you couldn't get a taxi down there, and you had to walk everywhere. So the old dirt road finally, years later, got gravel on it, and they built like a cattle ranch before you went on to the mission. Now, all the men who worked and lived at the mission, they used to meet at the pubs. The pubs was like an employment centre. They had no employment centres back there, okay? So, the men, all the Aboriginal men would hang around outside the pubs. All the boss cockies would do their drinking at the Max Hotel, the elite, okay? When they finished drinking, they would walk across the road to the Imperial, which is the hotel. It's still there, but it's all everything else now, okay? So the Imperial Hotel was where the Aboriginal men went and waited, because the boss cockies would come across and pick out their workers to go out into the shearing sheds or to do work out on the farms, on the land, on the properties. And the mission men always missed out, because the boss cocky said, no, I'm not going down the mission to pick you up, because you had to sign on and sign on. There was a house that had a veranda which became the manager's house. There was a table out on the veranda with a pencil and an exercise book. You had to sign on, and then when you left, you had to sign off. If you were caught on the reserve without permission, you could be fined. They'd call the police and you could be fined, you could be charged. If you didn't have the money to pay the fine, you were then put in jail. Okay, that's how severe it was. That was right up until 1969. So, the men who lived on the mission said, right, let's get smart here. Tell the boss cockies that they don't have to come on to the mission, we'll meet them up at the gate. And that's how they solved that problem. The Aboriginal men on the mission used to walk up to the gate and wait for the boss cocky to come and pick them up, okay, and take them out to work. So that solved that problem, okay. When I used to go down the mission, I used to go down the mission to Mrs. Ravenel's, and I used to sleep with Margie Ravenel. I used to go over to Mr. and Mrs. Binge's, and I'd sleep with Francis, Frano, Claire, all them. We'd all sleep together out on the veranda. And those days the mission was completely different to what it is today. They had grapevines, they had fruit trees, they had oleander bushes, they had lawns. They took pride in their houses. Their houses were kept clean, not because of the manager, but because that's how they were. Things were boiled in the copper, sheets, clothes. They were washed, ironed, you know, spotless. And today, it's completely different if you go down the mission today, because it's a different generation of people. Okay, so I finished school because back then, if you were infants, that's all the teaching you got. When you got primary school age, you left. There was no school to go to. You were not allowed to go to the white school in town. So my father, because he got his certificate of exemption, which freed him from underneath the Aborigines Act, the Protection Act, because if you were born Aboriginal, half caste or whatever, you automatically came under the Aborigines Protection Act. And they decided where you would go to work, who you married, what mission you lived on. If you played up, they'd kick you off. They wouldn't let you on the missions. You end up living on the riverbank or in places like the Top Camp. Okay? So when my father got his certificate of exemption, that allowed